music in the area. They were been trying to figure out where it was coming from. Do you know of any parties that would be in the area or anything like that?
God, no. I was sound asleep.
Okay, yeah.
It wasn't the voice of a panicked man, nor was it the voice of someone who had just witnessed a tragedy. It was Kevin Monahan's first response, a man who lived alone in a remote rural area when asked by police why a group of officers were near his house. Just minutes earlier, a frantic 911 call had come in from Washington County, New York. "She's been shot. We don't know what happened," the caller said. Then the signal went dead. No address, no GPS signal, just a vague whisper. "We're somewhere near Hebron." A group of young people were making their way to a weekend gathering, but their GPS took them down a dark alley where there were no streetlights and headlights barely illuminated the dark trees. In the car, Kaylin, a 20-year-old with bright brown eyes and a warm smile, sat in the back seat, looking at the map and chatting with her friends. But no one expected that one wrong turn would turn that night into a fateful one. No sirens, no chase scenes, no screams for help. Just one gunshot and one question. Was anyone really threatened? That evening, Kaylin Gillis and 3 friends got in the car, leaving the town of Schuylerville to go to a meeting in the countryside of Hebron, where the phone signal is patchy and the winding roads often make GPS useless. The group was excited. No one expected that a small mistake on the map would put them in an unforeseen situation. At about 9:45 p.m., the SUV Kaylin and her group were traveling in began to stray off the main road. There were no clear signs. The dim streetlights were only enough to see a few meters ahead. They stopped at a turn that looked like the entrance to a house, hoping to turn around and find the right direction. The house was deep in the deserted land, completely isolated from the surrounding residential areas. No lights, no noise, just darkness and eerie silence. The driver, Kaylin's boyfriend, slowly pulled into the driveway to turn around. No one got out of the car, no one knocked. They had just turned the car around when suddenly 2 loud bangs rang out from the darkened yard. There was a moment of silence, then a frantic scream from the back seat. "Kaylin's been shot!" In an instant, the ride had turned into a race to find a cell phone signal and call 911. They couldn't be sure what had happened. Was it a gunshot or fireworks? Had someone really been aiming at them? Or had it all been a cruel mistake? But the blood on Kaylin's hands was real, and she was losing consciousness. The time from 21:55 to 22:10 was the blurriest. No one remembered exactly how far they'd traveled, only that they'd finally pulled up in an open area near the edge of town, where the cell phone signal was strong enough to connect. While the friend called 911, the other held Kaylin, hoping for a miracle. Police later determined that the shots had come from the house the car had pulled into. The homeowner, a man who lived alone, was known to be averse to strangers. Neighbors rarely saw him, but in recent weeks, someone had heard what sounded like shooting practice in the backyard. Not unusual in a rural area, but notable after the incident. A security camera from a nearby farm captured the car's headlights turning into the driveway and leaving in less than 90 seconds. There was no argument, no break-in, but later that night a life was lost because of an unexpected decision and an unexpected reaction. The friend's SUV stopped on a rough dirt road a few miles from town. In the pitch black, they rushed to check on Kaylin. She was still breathing, but she was getting weaker. None of them had any medical knowledge. None of them knew if the bullet was still inside. They only knew that each second was another step away from life. Blake Walsh, Kaylin's boyfriend, was the one who dialed 911. His voice, clear on the recording, was a mixture of fear and panic. He said they were somewhere near Hebron, that my girlfriend was shot while we were trying to turn around, but couldn't say for sure where or by whom. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, ending with a plea. "Please, come quick. She's losing a lot of blood." The first police team reached the group at approximately 10:25 p.m., using the call's location and information from a nearby paramedic. When the ambulance arrived, Kaylin was unresponsive. Although she was transported to a nearby rural health district, she died en route. At that point, it was still an unexplained emergency. At the same time, another police team was dispatched to the house where the group had turned into. From the outside, there was no sign of a shooting. The front door was closed with no signs of forced entry. The front yard was quiet, as if nothing had happened. No lights were on, no sound. When the police knocked on the door, no one answered. When the investigator questioned Kaylin's friends, the details began to fall apart. Blake claimed they never got out of the car, but another said it looked like the yard lights had been turned on just before the explosion. Another said they saw a figure standing behind a curtain, watching them as the car began to turn around. These seemingly small details gradually became clear. The incident was not a simple accident. Remarkably, it was Blake's first statement, that they had only been turning in for less than a minute, that raised questions for investigators. For if it had been just a minute, how could it have led to such an extreme reaction from the people inside the house? At the time, no one knew that this short, almost overlooked statement would be the first piece to unravel the entire case. A seemingly absurd incident, but one that contained many layers of contradictions that had never been revealed. The wooden house deep in the Hebron Hills appeared completely isolated. No fence, no cameras, no signs of anyone entering or leaving. When the police executed a search warrant the next morning, the first thing they noted was that there had been no vandalism or forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows were closed, and everything inside was unusually neat. However, this excessive normalcy highlighted a series of strange points. At the entrance was a double-barreled shotgun sitting on a shelf on the wall. Not hidden, not secured. Next to it was a towel with a dried reddish-brown stain, collected for examination. There was a faint drag mark on the carpet near the window, as if someone had been moving or standing there for a long time. Upon closer inspection, the specialist noticed a small piece of black rubber, not part of the homeowner's interior or car, which was identified as a rearview mirror cushion, matching the SUV Kaylin and her group had. The hospital's forensic report determined that Kaylin died from a shotgun wound to the neck, resulting in severe blood loss. However, the angle at which the bullet was received was striking. It came from a top-down angle, inconsistent with the report that she was sitting in the car turning around. It is likely that the bullet was fired from a higher position or that the shooter had stepped out of the door. In addition, the autopsy found no signs of struggle or collision. Kaylin had no scratches or foreign objects under her nails, but she did have a small bruise on her right wrist, apparently from hitting a hard object. What caught the investigators' attention was that she was right-handed, but the bruise was on the outside of her wrist, a sign that her hand may have been raised in a defensive position at the time of the shot. A later photo of the scene showed that Kaylin's seat position was completely intact, the car door was not open, and her seatbelt was still fastened. That confirmed she had never left the car. And then, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit, it was that slight bruise that shifted the investigation from a mistake to the hypothesis of a deliberate act. When Kaylin Gillis died from a gunshot while sitting in her car, there was no sign of a collision or confrontation. The whole thing looked like an accident. But for the Washington County investigation team, intuition told them that behind that seemingly accidental trigger was a veil that needed to be lifted. And to get to the truth, they chose not to rush to conclusions, but to quietly observe, compare every word with every piece of evidence, every step with every trace, and let the smallest details do their work. The suspect was quickly identified. In the remote area where the incident occurred, there was only one house located next to the dirt road that Kaylin's group had turned onto to make a U-turn. That was Kevin Monahan's house. The 65-year-old lived alone, with no neighbors, no surveillance system, and no witnesses to his actions that night other than himself. But records and accounts from people who lived nearby paint a remarkable portrait. A man who disliked strangers, had a history of getting angry when a delivery person stood in the wrong place, had a gun in his house, and had a history of reacting violently to anything he perceived as intrusion. When police approached him the next morning, Monahan's cooperation did not come easily. He refused to leave his house, called his lawyer, and barricaded himself in for nearly an hour. When he finally opened the door, his first statement seemed reasonable. "I thought they were bad guys, so I fired a warning shot." But the more he listened, the seemingly innocuous words opened up a series of subtle contradictions. Monahan said he didn't see anyone clearly, only heard the car, that it sat there for a long time, and that he shot out of fear. But in the security camera footage from a nearby farm, which was far enough away to show only the faint glow of headlights and movement, the Kaylin's car stopped for less than 30 seconds before turning around. No one got out, there was no loud noise, and there was absolutely no threatening behavior. It was a short period of time that hardly justified shooting. When they cross-examined the testimony, the investigators cleverly set a simple trap. They did not specify the length of the video, but simply asked Monahan how long he thought the car had been there. Without hesitation, he replied, "At least a minute and a half." A seemingly random answer, but it completely disrupted the flow of events he had described. Because if he could not see the car clearly, how could he know exactly how long it had been stopped? And if it was only 30 seconds, then the act of pulling out the gun, aiming, and then returning to the house, all of which could only have happened if he had prepared in advance. The gun used in the crime was a 20-gauge shotgun, a weapon that requires a clear trigger pull and cannot slip and go off by accident, as he claimed. And the strangest thing, if it was just a warning shot, why did the bullet go straight into the back seat, right where Kaylin was sitting? From there, the police expanded the search of the entire crime scene and found a small, almost forgotten detail: a piece of black rubber lying on the front steps of Monahan's house. Investigators collected the sample and later discovered that it was a perfect match for the right side mirror of the SUV, which had been broken during the incident. And just when it seemed that the case had settled on an unfortunate path, a seemingly innocuous detail, a crushed piece of rubber, was the key to exposing all the discrepancies in his testimony. Monahan did not know that, with his seemingly meticulous calculations, he had left an undeniable trace. The police ended up with a thick dossier, physical evidence, forensic examining. That detail, though small, carried special weight. It suggested that the shooting distance was much closer than Monahan had described. In fact, he was likely standing right in front of the house, closer to the car than he had admitted. And so the act of pulling the trigger was no longer a reflex action in the house, but a proactive act, one who could have seen the target clearly and had enough time to stop, but didn't. Another point that couldn't be overlooked: in his house, investigators found a towel with dried blood on it. DNA testing confirmed that it was Kaylin's blood. The blood in the house, combined with a bruise on the victim's right wrist, believed to be a reflex reaction to danger, bolstered the argument that Monahan not only knew someone was injured, but also that he may have stepped outside the house and had more contact with the scene than he had said. While some have theorized that it was an accident or a panic reaction due to Monahan's isolation, it was these disparate details that together built a map of the truth. This was no longer the story of an old man being disturbed in the middle of the night. It was a deliberate incident with time to consider and with signs of an attempt to cover up after the fact. And just when it seemed that the case had settled on an unfortunate path, a seemingly innocuous detail, a crushed piece of rubber, was the key to exposing all the discrepancies in his testimony. Monahan did not know that, with his seemingly meticulous calculations, he had left an undeniable trace. The police ended up with a thick dossier, physical evidence, forensic examination, camera footage, witness statements, and especially a series of contradictions from the suspect's own story. All of this was enough to send the case to the prosecutor's office with the conclusion: this was not an accident, not self-defense, but an act of intentional violence with fatal consequences. The truth in the end did not leave anyone in the dark. It just chose to remain silent, waiting for someone patient enough to listen to the smallest details to speak up. On January 9, 2024, the Washington County Court officially opened the trial of Kevin Monahan, the man charged with second-degree murder in the death of Kaylin Gillis. The courtroom was packed with people, including the victim's family, Kaylin's friends, reporters, and even local residents curious about the reason behind the shooting on that fateful night. From the very first day, the trial received shocking testimony from the suspect himself. Monahan, who had previously insisted that this was an unfortunate accident, suddenly changed his argument. During the trial, he said that he only fired a warning shot because he was afraid of being invaded and was not aware that anyone was hit. However, the prosecution immediately countered with a series of evidence, from surveillance video, crime scene examination results, to testimony from surviving witnesses. The prosecution made a strong case. Monahan's actions were not self-defense, but deliberate. They showed that the Kaylin's car was stopped for only 27 seconds, far too short to pose a real threat. They also emphasized that the gun was held at the ready, that no one entered or knocked, and most importantly, the victims sat in the car and did not get out. The defense sought to highlight their client's insecurities, arguing that Monahan lived alone, had been robbed before, and may have overreacted out of panic. They tried to paint him as a socially disconnected old man who did not understand the consequences of his actions. But that was not enough to convince the jury. On January 23rd, after more than 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kevin Monahan guilty of second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and tampering with evidence. 2 months later, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years before he could apply for parole.
So as to the conviction of murder in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of 25 years to life in prison. For the conviction of reckless endangerment in the first degree, I'm following the law. I'm going to sentence you to a concurrent 2 1/3 to 7-year period of incarceration. As to tampering with physical evidence conviction,
when the verdict was announced, Kaylin's family broke down in tears. Her mother put her head on her husband's shoulder, while her boyfriend Blake clenched his fists until they turned white. On the other side, Monahan showed no emotion, just looked down, silent. In society, the verdict caused a divided opinion. Many saw it as a victory for justice, but others questioned the line between lawful self-defense and overstepping the mark. However, everyone agreed on one thing. A young woman who had done nothing wrong lost her life in a situation no one should have to endure. Kaylin Gillis, 20 years old, did not carry a weapon, did not get out of the car, did not threaten anyone. She was just a young person on her way to a party with friends in the middle of a deserted suburb where the dim light made them accidentally choose a wrong turn. But it was at that turn that she could never return. Kaylin's family not only lost a child, but also lost their future, their dreams, their dinners together, and the little things that were no longer repeated. Every trial, every time the evidence was revealed, it was like rubbing more pain into that pain. A moment of impulsiveness, a cold decision, wiped everything away. This case is not only a personal tragedy, but also a warning bell about the loss of emotional control and psychological deviation, especially when it is associated with weapons. A person living in isolation with a wary mentality can become a real danger when the line between defense and extreme reaction is blurred. It is also thanks to the development of technology, security cameras, gun examination, and crime scene forensics that the truth is clearly established. Without that evidence, would the outcome have been different? Would someone in the group of friends have been charged? Would the suspect's testimony have been considered reasonable? The case raises a difficult question to answer. Do you think a 25-year prison sentence is enough to pay for a human life? And if the person who was shot was not an innocent girl, would society care so much? That is what makes us not only mourn Kaylin, but also think more deeply about the impermanence of life, about the consequences of uncontrolled behavior, and about how sometimes just one wrong action is enough to forever leave no way back.